Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of man who believed actions spoke louder than words. At 32, he owned a small auto repair shop in downtown Portland, where his reputation for fixing the unfixable had earned him a steady stream of customers. His hands were always stained with grease, his back perpetually sore from bending over engine blocks. But he took pride in every car that rolled out of his garage purring like new. The shop had been his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Thompsons had turned wrenches under the same fluorescent lights, breathing in the familiar scent of motor oil and metal. Marcus had grown up believing that if something was broken, you fixed it with your hands, not your mouth. That philosophy had served him well in business, but it was destroying his marriage to Sarah. Sarah Chen had been the light of his life since they met in college 8 years ago. She was studying literature while he was in automotive technology, and somehow their different worlds had collided in the most beautiful way. She would read him poetry while he worked on her old Honda Civic, and he would explain the intricate dance of pistons and valves while she corrected his grammar in the love letters he tried to write. But somewhere along the way, the conversations had stopped. The poetry readings had ended. The love letters had become grocery lists and reminders about bills. Now, as Marcus sat in the waiting room of Riverside Community Center, fidgeting with his wedding ring, he wondered how they had gotten to this point. The marriage counseling sessions had been Sarah's idea, of course. She was always the one pushing for them to talk about their feelings, to communicate better, to open up. Dr. Patricia Williams had been their counselor for 3 months now, and Marcus still felt like he was speaking a foreign language in these sessions. While Sarah articulated her emotions with the precision of the English teacher she was, Marcus found himself stumbling over words, his calloused hands gesturing helplessly as he tried to explain feelings he had never learned to name. Today felt different, though. There was a tension in Sarah's shoulders that he recognized, the same tension she carried when she was grading particularly difficult essays or dealing with challenging students. Her dark hair was pulled back tighter than usual, and she kept checking her phone, something she never did during their sessions. When Dr. Williams called them in, Sarah walked ahead of Marcus, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She took her usual seat on the left side of the beige couch, leaving the standard 2 feet of space between where she sat and where Marcus would sit. That space had been growing wider each week, he noticed. Dr. Williams settled into her chair across from them, her notebook balanced on her knee, pen ready. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the type of person who made a living helping people find words for the things they couldn't say. "How has your week been?" Dr. Williams asked, her standard opening question. Marcus opened his mouth to give his standard response about work being busy and everything being fine, but Sarah cut him off. "I want to try something different today," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying an edge Marcus had never heard before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last week, Dr. Williams, about concrete actions versus abstract promises." Dr. Williams nodded encouragingly. "What thoughts have you had about that?" Sarah turned to look at Marcus directly, her brown eyes meeting his for the first time in weeks with complete focus. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once." The room seemed to shrink around them. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, recognizing the tone Sarah used when she was about to deliver news that would change everything. It was the same tone she had used when she told him she was ready to get married. The same tone when she said she wanted to start trying for children. And the same tone 3 years ago when she said she thought they should wait on kids until they figured out their relationship. "For 8 years, I've been asking you to fix us," Sarah continued, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I've asked you to go to counseling, to read books about marriage, to talk to me about what you're thinking and feeling. I've asked you to help me understand why you can shut down for days when you're upset, why you can spend more time diagnosing what's wrong with a stranger's car than with your own wife." Marcus started to speak, but Sarah held up a hand and something in her expression stopped him cold. "Every time I bring up our problems, you tell me you'll work on it. You promise you'll try harder. You say you love me and that should be enough. But Marcus, love isn't just a feeling. It's a series of actions, choices, and changes. And I haven't seen any of those from you." Dr. Williams was taking notes, but Marcus barely noticed. All his attention was focused on Sarah, on the way her voice was getting stronger with each word, as if she had been practicing this speech. "I've watched you spend entire weekends rebuilding engines," Sarah said. I've seen you research parts for hours, call suppliers across the country, and refuse to give up until you find exactly what you need to make something run perfectly again. You have patience and dedication and skill when it comes to fixing things that matter to you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 8 years of accumulated frustration and love and disappointment. So here's what I'm proposing, Sarah said, and Marcus felt the world shift beneath him. I'm going to give you 6 months. Not to promise me you'll change, not to tell me how you feel about me, but to prove that you can actually fix what's broken between us. Show me the same dedication you show a broken transmission. Research what it takes to make a marriage work. Put in the hours. Find the right parts. Don't give up when it gets difficult. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow more powerful than before. Prove you can fix it, and I'll prove how I feel. The room fell completely silent. Even Dr. Williams had stopped writing, her pen suspended above the paper as she watched them. Marcus felt like all the air had been sucked out of the space, like he was underwater, hearing Sarah's words echo from somewhere far away. He had always known Sarah was smart, but he had never fully understood how strong she was until this moment. She wasn't crying or yelling or pleading. She was simply laying out the facts, giving him a problem to solve, speaking to him in the only language he seemed to understand. The language of fixing things. The challenge was issued. The room remained silent, and Marcus Thompson, for the first time in his adult life, had no idea where to find the right tools for the job. The drive home from the counseling session was the longest 20 minutes of Marcus's life. Sarah rode in the passenger seat of his truck, staring out the window at the passing neighborhoods, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She had said everything she needed to say in Dr. Williams's office, and now she was letting the weight of her words settle between them like dust after an explosion. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his mind racing. 6 months. Half a year to prove he could fix the most important thing in his life, and he didn't even know where to start. In his shop, every problem had a logical sequence. Diagnose, research, order parts, repair, test. But marriage wasn't a machine with a manual and replacement parts available online. When they pulled into their driveway, Sarah got out without waiting for him and walked straight to the house. Marcus sat in the truck for a moment longer, looking at their home. It was a small craftsman-style house they had bought 3 years ago, painted yellow with white trim and a red front door that Sarah had insisted on. They had spent their first weekend there planting flowers in the front yard, laughing when Marcus accidentally planted the tulip bulbs upside down. Now the flower beds were overgrown with weeds, and Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had heard Sarah laugh. Inside, Sarah went straight to their bedroom and closed the door. Not slammed it, just closed it with the quiet finality of someone setting a boundary. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sounds of her moving around, probably changing out of her work clothes and into the comfortable yoga pants she wore when she was grading papers or reading. He wandered into the living room and sat heavily on the couch, the same couch where they used to watch movies together every Friday night. Now it felt too big, too empty, like everything else in their house. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at it, wondering who he could call. His father had passed away 2 years ago, and his mother lived in Phoenix now, happy in her retirement community and probably not interested in hearing about her son's marriage problems. He had a few friends from high school, but most of their conversations revolved around sports and work. He had never been the type to discuss personal issues with other men. That was part of the problem, he realized. He had no model for how to talk about emotions, no toolkit for relationship repair. His father had been a good man, but he had shown love through providing and protecting, not through talking and sharing feelings. The Thompson men were fixers, not talkers, but Sarah wasn't a car. She was a complex, intelligent woman who needed more than financial security and physical safety. She needed emotional connection, and Marcus was beginning to understand that he had no idea how to provide that. He opened his laptop and stared at the blank search bar. Where did a man go to learn how to save his marriage? He felt foolish even thinking about it, but he typed in, "How to fix marriage problems," and hit enter. The results overwhelmed him immediately. Thousands of articles, books, videos, and websites promising to save relationships. Some looked legitimate, others seemed like scams. He clicked on a few, reading about communication techniques and love languages and emotional intelligence. But the words felt foreign, like trying to read a repair manual written in another language. His phone buzzed with a text from his shop manager. Tony, Mrs. Henderson's Buick is making that noise again. Want me to take another look or wait for you tomorrow? Marcus started to type back that he would handle it in the morning, then stopped. This was exactly what Sarah was talking about. Mrs. Henderson's car got his immediate attention and problem-solving focus, but his wife's needs got pushed to tomorrow next month. He texted Tony to go ahead and diagnose the problem, then closed his laptop and walked to the bookshelf in their living room. Sarah's books filled most of the shelves, organized by genre and author. Literature, poetry, psychology, self-help books she had bought over the years and occasionally mentioned to him. Books he had never paid attention to because they weren't about engines or electrical systems. One title caught his eye. The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, by John Gottman. The book was well worn with sticky notes protruding from various pages. Sarah had read this book, had probably tried to share its insights with him at some point, and he had probably been too distracted or tired to listen. He pulled the book from the shelf and opened it to the first page. Sarah had written her name in careful script inside the front cover, dated 3 years ago. 3 years she had been trying to fix their marriage on her own, reading books and attending counseling sessions and asking him to participate in conversations he kept avoiding. Marcus sat back down on the couch and began to read. The first chapter talked about the importance of understanding your partner's inner world, about turning toward each other instead of away, about building fondness and admiration, simple concepts that seemed impossible to implement when he had spent years turning away from difficult conversations. As he read, he began to see patterns in his own behavior that made his stomach clench with recognition. The way he would give Sarah one-word answers when she asked about his day. The way he would solve her problems with practical suggestions when all she wanted was for him to listen. The way he had gradually stopped asking her about her dreams and goals because he was afraid her answers might include a life without him. Around 10 o'clock, he heard the bedroom door open. Sarah emerged wearing her pajamas, her hair down around her shoulders, looking tired and somehow smaller than she had in the counselor's office. She moved quietly to the kitchen and filled a glass with water, glancing at him on the couch with the book in his hands. "Is that mine?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Yeah," Marcus said, holding up the book. "I found it on the shelf." "You've read this?" 3 years ago, Sarah said, taking a sip of water. "I tried to get you to read it with me, remember? You said you were too busy with the shop." Marcus did remember now, vaguely. Sarah had mentioned wanting to read some marriage book together, and he had brushed her off, probably made some joke about not needing a manual to know how to love his wife. "I'm reading it now," he said. Sarah studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether this was genuine interest or just another empty gesture. "It's a good book," she said finally. "Gottman's research is solid." She turned to go back to the bedroom, then paused at the hallway entrance. "Marcus, yeah?" "I meant what I said today. I'm not going anywhere for 6 months, but I'm also not going to keep having the same conversations we've been having for years. If you want to fix this, you need to actually fix it. Not just try, not just promise. Fix it." She disappeared back into the bedroom, leaving Marcus alone with the book and the weight of her words. He read until 2 in the morning, taking notes on a legal pad he found in Sarah's desk drawer. He wrote down terms like emotional attunement and repair attempts, concepts that felt as foreign as advanced calculus, but somehow essential to understand. When he finally went to bed, Sarah was asleep on her side of the mattress. Curled away from the middle where they used to meet each other every night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 6 months ahead of him and wondering if he had the skills to rebuild something he had spent years allowing to fall apart. Tomorrow, he decided, he would approach this marriage like the most important repair job of his life, because that's exactly what it was. The next morning, Marcus woke up before his alarm for the first time in months. Sarah was already gone, having left early for school as she did every Tuesday to help struggling students during morning tutoring. He found a note on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, written in her careful handwriting. "Coffee's programmed. Have a good day." It was the same note she had been leaving him for years, but today it felt different. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. Neutral, professional, like something she might write to a roommate. Marcus poured his coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the Gottman book, continuing where he had left off the night before. Chapter 3 discussed the importance of enhancing love maps, which apparently meant knowing the details of your partner's inner world. The book included exercises, questions couples should ask each other about dreams, fears, stresses, and joys. As he read through the sample questions, Marcus realized with growing horror how little he actually knew about Sarah's current life. He knew she taught 10th grade English at Roosevelt High School. He knew she graded papers every evening and complained about the administration. But when was the last time he had asked her about her favorite students, or what book she was excited to teach, or how she felt about the new curriculum changes she had mentioned months ago? He grabbed the legal pad where he had been taking notes and started writing down everything he could remember about Sarah's current interests, worries, and goals. The list was embarrassingly short. At the shop, Marcus tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting to the book's concepts. Tony noticed his distraction around noon when Marcus spent 20 minutes staring at a perfectly functional brake line. "Boss, you okay?" Tony asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Tony had worked for Marcus for 4 years, ever since graduating from the local technical college. He was 26, married to his high school sweetheart, and seemed to navigate relationships with an ease that Marcus envied. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus said, setting down his wrench. Tony raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure. How do you and Lisa talk about your feelings and stuff?" The question felt awkward coming out of his mouth, but Tony didn't seem surprised. He leaned against the workbench, considering the question seriously. "You mean like when we're having problems, or just in general?" "Both, I guess." Tony was quiet for a moment, then said, "Lisa's always been better at the talking thing than me. But I learned pretty quick that when she's upset about something, she doesn't want me to fix it right away. She wants me to understand it first. Like really get why she's feeling what she's feeling." "How do you do that?" "I ask questions. Not like interrogation questions, but like curious questions. What was that like for you? How did that make you feel? What would help right now?" "Stuff like that." Marcus nodded, making mental notes. "And that works?" Tony shrugged. "Most of the time. The key is actually caring about the answers, you know? Not just waiting for your turn to talk or thinking about how to solve the problem, actually listening." That afternoon, Marcus left the shop early for the first time in 2 years, leaving Tony in charge and promising to check in by phone if any major problems arose. He drove to the bookstore downtown, a place he hadn't been since college when he used to meet Sarah there for study dates. The bookstore had a whole section dedicated to relationships and marriage. Marcus felt self-conscious browsing the shelves, glancing around to make sure no one he knew was watching him. He picked up several books that looked promising, including one about emotional intelligence and another about communication in marriage. At the checkout counter, the young woman behind the register smiled at his selections. "Someone's working on their relationship," she said cheerfully. Marcus felt his face heat up. "Yeah, something like that." "Good for you," she said, bagging the books. "My parents went through a rough patch a few years ago, and my dad started reading books like these. Really made a difference." On his way home, Marcus stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for dinner. Not just any dinner, but the Thai curry Sarah had mentioned loving from a restaurant they used to visit when they were dating. He had never attempted to cook anything more complicated than grilled cheese, but the recipe he found online seemed manageable. When Sarah got home at 6 o'clock, she found Marcus in the kitchen, surrounded by chopped vegetables and various spice containers, stirring a pot that smelled remarkably like authentic red curry. "What's all this?" she asked, setting her work bag by the door. "I thought I'd make dinner," Marcus said, trying to sound casual. "I know you like that curry from Bangkok Garden, so I looked up a recipe." Sarah's expression was unreadable as she surveyed the kitchen. It was messier than she usually liked, with cutting boards and measuring spoons scattered across the counter. But the smell was incredible, and Marcus was clearly putting in effort. "It smells good," she said carefully. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, something they hadn't done together in months. Usually Sarah ate while grading papers and Marcus ate standing over the sink, both of them too tired or distracted for conversation. Tonight, Marcus put away his phone and focused on Sarah. He asked her about her day, not the perfunctory "how was work" he usually offered, but specific questions about her students and her lessons. "Jenny Morrison is finally starting to understand symbolism," Sarah said, her face lighting up in a way Marcus hadn't seen in weeks. "She wrote this amazing analysis of the green light in Gatsby yesterday. I think it's the first time she's really connected with literature instead of just going through the motions. That must feel pretty good, Marcus said, seeing her get it like that. Sarah paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, looking at him with surprise. It does. It's one of the best parts of teaching, actually. Those breakthrough moments. They talked for almost an hour, longer than they had talked in months. Sarah told him about the new principal who was trying to implement changes too quickly, about the book club she was considering joining, about her frustration with parents who blamed teachers for their children's poor grades. Marcus found himself genuinely interested in her answers, asking follow-up questions and sharing his own thoughts. It wasn't the deep emotional conversation the marriage books talked about, but it felt like a start. After dinner, Sarah helped him clean the dishes, working alongside him at the sink in a comfortable rhythm they had lost somewhere along the way. Marcus, she said, as she dried the last plate. This was nice. The dinner, the conversation. Thank you. You're welcome, he said. I want to do this more often. Talk, I mean. Really talk. Sarah studied his face again, that same evaluating look she had given him when she found him reading her book the night before. I'd like that too, she said finally. But it can't just be when you're trying to prove a point, you know? It has to be because you actually want to know about my life. I do want to know, Marcus said, and as the words came out, he realized they were true. I think I forgot how to ask. That night they watched a movie together on the couch, not quite touching, but close enough that Marcus could smell Sarah's shampoo. It wasn't the physical intimacy they had lost, but it was a kind of presence he had forgotten they were capable of. As the credits rolled, Sarah stood to go to bed. She paused beside the couch and looked down at him. This is good, she said quietly, but 6 months is a long time, Marcus. One good day doesn't fix everything. I know, he said. I'm not trying to fix everything in one day. I'm trying to figure out how to fix it properly. Sarah nodded, something that might have been approval flickering across her face. Good night. Good night. After she left, Marcus sat on the couch with one of his new books, reading about the difference between hearing and listening, about the importance of emotional validation, about the way small daily interactions could build or erode a marriage over time. He was beginning to understand that fixing his marriage wouldn't be like fixing a car. There was no single broken part to replace, no clear diagnostic procedure to follow. Instead, it would require rebuilding their relationship from the foundation up, one conversation and one shared meal and one moment of genuine attention at a time. It would be the hardest repair job of his life. But as he thought about the way Sarah's face had lit up when she talked about her student's breakthrough, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, hope that he might actually be capable of learning the skills he needed. 3 weeks into his marriage repair project, Marcus hit his first major setback. It was a Thursday evening, and he had come home from the shop later than usual because Mrs. Patterson's ancient Volvo had developed a mysterious electrical problem that took him most of the afternoon to diagnose. He was covered in grease, tired, and looking forward to the dinner conversation that had become a bright spot in his daily routine. But when he walked through the front door, he found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of papers spread around her, red pen in hand, looking frazzled and overwhelmed. Hey, he said, hanging his keys on the hook by the door. How was your day? Terrible, Sarah said without looking up from the essay she was grading. The copier broke down, so I had to handwrite all my lesson plans. Then during third period, 2 kids got into a fight over something stupid, and I had to spend my lunch period in the principal's office doing incident reports. And now I have 37 research papers to grade by tomorrow because I forgot the deadline was moved up. Marcus looked at the overwhelming pile of student work, then at Sarah's stressed expression, and felt the familiar urge to jump into problem-solving mode. Why don't you just grade half of them tonight and ask for an extension on the rest? He suggested, moving toward the kitchen to start dinner. I'm sure they'd understand if you explained about the copier situation. Sarah's pen stopped moving. She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. That's not how it works, Marcus. I can't just not do my job because I had a bad day. I'm not saying don't do your job, Marcus said, opening the refrigerator to see what they had for dinner. I'm just saying maybe there's a more efficient way to handle this. More efficient, Sarah repeated, her voice flat. Marcus paused, sensing he had stepped into dangerous territory but not understanding why. Yeah, Like maybe you could focus on the big issues in each paper instead of marking every little mistake. That would save time. The silence that followed was different from their comfortable dinner conversation silences. This silence had weight and sharp edges. "Do you think I don't know how to do my job?" Sarah asked quietly. "No, of course not. I was just trying to help." "By telling me to lower my standards and take shortcuts?" Marcus turned around to face her fully, confused by how quickly this conversation had gone wrong. "I wasn't telling you to lower your standards. I was trying to suggest solutions to reduce your stress." Sarah set down her pen and looked at him directly. "Marcus, do you remember what we talked about during dinner last week? About my student Jenny and her breakthrough with symbolism?" "Of course," Marcus said. "You were excited because she finally understood the green light thing in Gatsby." "Right. And do you remember what I said about why that moment mattered so much?" Marcus searched his memory, trying to recall the exact conversation. "Because it's rewarding to see students connect with literature. I said it mattered because Jenny had been struggling all semester, and I had been working with her individually, giving her detailed feedback on every assignment, refusing to give up on her even when she wanted to give up on herself. The breakthrough happened because I didn't take shortcuts, because I cared enough to put in the full effort." Understanding began to dawn on Marcus, along with a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Those 37 research papers represent 37 kids who are counting on me to take their work seriously," Sarah continued. "Some of them stayed up late working on these papers. Some of them wrote about things that matter deeply to them, and you're suggesting I should just skim through them to save time?" "I didn't mean it like that," Marcus said, but even as he spoke, he could hear how his suggestions must have sounded to Sarah. "I was trying to help you feel less overwhelmed." "I know you were trying to help," Sarah said, her voice getting quieter instead of louder, which Marcus had learned was actually more dangerous. "But this is exactly what I've been trying to explain to you for months. When I'm stressed or upset or struggling with something, your first instinct is always to fix it by changing what I'm doing, instead of understanding why I'm doing it." Marcus felt the conversation slipping away from him, felt himself reverting to old patterns despite weeks of reading and practicing new approaches. "So what should I have done? Just watched you stress yourself out? You could have asked how I was feeling about having so much work. You could have offered to make dinner so I could focus on grading. You could have brought me a cup of tea and asked if there was anything I needed." Each suggestion hit Marcus like a small revelation, simple actions that showed support without trying to manage her choices. "Instead," Sarah continued, "your solution was for me to do my job differently. Do you see the pattern here?" Marcus did see it, and it made him uncomfortable. It was the same pattern they had discussed in counseling, the same issue that came up repeatedly in the marriage books he had been reading. He kept trying to fix Sarah's problems instead of supporting her through them. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting down at the table across from her. "You're right. I did it again." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I know you're trying, Marcus. I can see that you're reading the books and making an effort. But trying isn't the same as changing." The words stung because they were fair. For 3 weeks, Marcus had been implementing new behaviors like items on a checklist, but he hadn't fundamentally changed his approach to their relationship. He was still thinking like a mechanic trying to fix a broken machine instead of a partner trying to support another person. "What can I do right now?" he asked. "To actually help instead of just trying to fix things?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "You could make dinner while I grade papers, maybe put on some music, and later, when I'm done, you could ask me about the interesting things I read in the student essays, instead of asking me if I finished everything on my list." Marcus nodded and stood up to start dinner. As he moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple pasta dish and selecting a playlist of Sarah's favorite jazz music, he thought about the difference between helping and fixing. Helping meant supporting Sarah in doing what she needed to do. Fixing meant trying to change what she was doing to make it easier. The distinction seemed obvious now, but it required a fundamental shift in his thinking that was proving harder to implement than he had expected. While the pasta cooked, Marcus brought Sarah a cup of tea and a small plate of crackers, setting them down quietly beside her without comment. She looked up and smiled, the first genuine smile she had given him all evening. "Thank you," she said. "This is perfect." They ate dinner mostly in comfortable silence, with Sarah continuing to grade papers between bites, while Marcus read one of his marriage books. It wasn't the engaging conversation he had been looking forward to, but it felt like partnership in a way their old routine of eating separately while watching television never had. Later that evening, after Sarah finished grading the last paper, she found Marcus reading on the couch and sat down beside him, closer than she had been willing to sit in months. Some of these kids wrote about really personal stuff, she said. One girl wrote her entire paper about how reading Maya Angelou helped her cope with her parents' divorce. Another boy wrote about finding identity through poetry after his family immigrated here from Somalia. Marcus closed his book and turned to face her, genuinely interested in hearing about her students' experiences. As Sarah shared the highlights and insights from the research papers, he realized that this was what she had needed all along. Not solutions to her workload, but recognition of the meaningful work she was doing, and someone who cared enough to hear about it. When she finished talking, Sarah leaned back against the couch cushions and looked at him thoughtfully. "You're learning," she said quietly. "It's not easy to change patterns that have been in place for years, but I can see you're learning." "It's harder than I expected," Marcus admitted. "I keep defaulting to trying to fix things instead of just being present with you." "That's normal," Sarah said. "Change is hard, but the fact that you can recognize when you're doing it is progress." As they sat together in the comfortable quiet of their living room, Marcus realized that fixing his marriage wasn't going to be a linear process. There would be setbacks and mistakes, moments when he reverted to old patterns and had to start again. But for the first time since Sarah's ultimatum, he felt like he was beginning to understand not just what he needed to do differently, but why it mattered. It wasn't about following rules or completing tasks on a relationship checklist. It was about fundamentally changing how he showed up as a partner, how he supported Sarah's goals and dreams instead of trying to manage them. It was about learning to love her in the language she could actually hear and understand, not just the language that came naturally to him. The work was far from finished. But as Sarah rested her head briefly on his shoulder before heading to bed, Marcus felt like he was finally on the right path. 2 months into his 6-month deadline, Marcus faced his biggest test yet. It came on a rainy Saturday morning when Sarah received a phone call that made her sink onto the kitchen chair, her face pale and her hand shaking as she hung up the phone. "My mom's in the hospital," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She fell yesterday morning and broke her hip. She didn't want to worry me, so she had Mrs. Chen from next door call instead of calling me herself." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Sarah's mother, Linda, lived alone in Sacramento, about 6 hours away. She was 73, fiercely independent, and had been like a second mother to Marcus since he and Sarah got married. She was also the type of person who would absolutely downplay a serious injury to avoid being a burden to her daughter. "Is she okay? I mean, what did the doctor say?" Marcus asked, moving to sit beside Sarah at the table. Mrs. Chen didn't have many details, just that Mom's in surgery right now and that I should come as soon as possible. Sarah's hands were trembling as she reached for her phone. "I need to call the school, find a substitute for Monday, pack a bag." Marcus watched Sarah start to spiral into panic mode, her mind jumping from one urgent task to the next without completing any of them. The old Marcus would have immediately started making lists and giving directions, taking charge of the logistics so Sarah could focus on her emotions. But the new Marcus, the one who had been reading about emotional support and partnership, recognized that Sarah didn't need him to manage this crisis. She needed him to be present with her in it. "What do you need from me right now?" he asked quietly, placing his hand over hers to still their trembling. Sarah looked at him with surprise, as if she had expected him to start making travel arrangements without asking. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I can't think straight." "That's okay," Marcus said. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. Why don't you call the hospital and get an update on your mom's condition? I'll make you some coffee and we can take this one step at a time." While Sarah made the phone call, Marcus prepared her favorite coffee and pulled out a notepad to help organize their thoughts. He could hear her talking to a nurse, asking about visiting hours and recovery expectations, her voice getting stronger as she gathered information. "She's out of surgery," Sarah reported when she hung up. "The hip replacement went well, but she'll be in the hospital for at least a week, then probably need physical therapy for several months." "She's asking for me." "Of course she is," Marcus said, handing her the coffee. "You're her daughter. She needs you there." Sarah cupped the warm mug in her hands, using it to steady herself. "I should probably stay for at least a week, maybe longer, depending on how she's doing. But I can't just abandon my classes right in the middle of the semester." The kids have their midterm essays due next Friday and— Sarah, Marcus interrupted gently, your mom broke her hip. Your students will understand if you need to be with her. The school will figure out coverage. But what about you? What about work? What about— She gestured vaguely at the space between them, the fragile progress they had been making in their marriage. Marcus felt a moment of panic at the thought of Sarah being 6 hours away for an indefinite period, especially when they were still in such a delicate phase of rebuilding their relationship. But looking at her worried face, he knew that supporting her meant putting her needs above his own fears. I'll drive you up there, he said. Tony can handle the shop for a few days, and I can work remotely on the administrative stuff. We'll figure out the rest as we go. You don't have to do that, Sarah said, but Marcus could hear the relief in her voice. It's a long drive, and you hate hospitals. It was true that Marcus had always been uncomfortable in medical settings ever since his father's long illness 2 years ago. But that discomfort seemed trivial compared to what Sarah was facing. I want to be there, he said. For you and for your mom. The drive to Sacramento was quiet but not tense. Sarah dozed fitfully in the passenger seat while Marcus focused on the road, thinking about how different this crisis felt from the ones they had navigated in the past. Before, he would have spent the drive trying to solve all of Sarah's problems, making phone calls and arrangements without consulting her. Today, he was simply being present with her anxiety instead of trying to fix it. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Linda awake but groggy from pain medication, her usually perfectly styled gray hair messy against the pillow. Her face lit up when she saw Sarah, then showed embarrassment when she noticed Marcus behind her. Oh, honey, you didn't need to bring Marcus all this way, Linda said, reaching for Sarah's hand. I'm fine, really. Just a little tumble. Mom, you had hip replacement surgery, Sarah said, settling into the chair beside the bed. That's not a little tumble. Marcus hung back, letting Sarah have her moment with her mother, but Linda caught his eye and waved him over. Marcus, thank you for bringing her, Linda said. I know this must be hard on both of you with everything else going on. Marcus felt a surge of surprise. He hadn't realized that Sarah had told her mother about their marriage problems, but Linda's knowing look suggested she was aware of their situation. Sarah needed to be here, he said simply. We both wanted to make sure you're okay. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself in an unexpectedly meaningful role. While Sarah focused on coordinating her mother's care, talking to doctors, and helping with physical therapy exercises, Marcus handled the practical details that needed attention. He researched rehabilitation facilities, organized Linda's mail and bills, and made sure Sarah ate regular meals and got enough sleep. But more importantly, he simply listened. When Sarah was frustrated with a doctor's lack of communication, Marcus listened to her vent without trying to fix the situation. When she was scared about her mother's long-term recovery, he acknowledged her fears without immediately offering reassurance. When she felt guilty about leaving her students, he validated her concern without trying to talk her out of it. On the third night, as they sat in the uncomfortable hotel room Marcus had booked near the hospital, Sarah turned to him with tears in her eyes. I've been thinking about what my mom said yesterday, about how marriage is about showing up for each other during the hard times, she said. I didn't expect you to drop everything and drive up here with me. Especially not right now, when we're still figuring out if this is going to work. Marcus set down the book he had been reading and gave her his full attention. Where else would I be? The old you would have sent me up here alone so you could keep the shop running, Sarah said. You would have called every few hours to check on me, but you wouldn't have actually been here. She was right, and they both knew it. The old Marcus would have seen his role as maintaining normal life, so Sarah could handle the crisis. He wouldn't have understood that his physical presence mattered more than his practical contributions. Your mom isn't just your family, Marcus said. She's my family too. And you're not just my wife dealing with a family emergency. You're my partner, and partners show up for each other. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who felt truly supported rather than managed. This is what I needed, she said quietly. Not just now with my mom, but all along. I needed to know that when something important was happening in my life, you would be there with me instead of trying to handle it for me. I'm learning the difference, Marcus said. It's harder than I thought it would be, but I'm learning. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah fell asleep with her head on Marcus's shoulder. Not because they had solved all their problems, but because she finally felt like she wasn't carrying them alone. When they returned home after Linda was settled into a rehabilitation facility, something had shifted between them. The crisis had tested the new patterns Marcus had been trying to establish, and for the first time, he had passed the test. Not perfectly, but genuinely. Sarah went back to school with a renewed sense of energy, knowing that her husband had proven himself capable of true partnership when it mattered most. And Marcus returned to work with a deeper understanding of what it meant to love someone, not just in the easy moments, but in the frightening, exhausting, complicated ones too. They still had 3 months left in Sarah's 6-month timeline, but as they settled back into their daily routines, both of them felt like they were building something new, rather than just trying to repair something broken. The hardest test had revealed that Marcus was finally learning to be the partner Sarah needed, not just the husband he had always thought he was. The 6-month deadline arrived on a Tuesday evening in October, exactly 183 days after Sarah had issued her ultimatum in Dr. Williams' office. Marcus had been counting the days, not with dread as he had initially, but with a growing sense of anticipation mixed with uncertainty. He came home from the shop to find Sarah in their kitchen, not grading papers or preparing dinner, but sitting at the table with a cup of tea simply waiting. She had changed out of her work clothes into the blue dress he had bought her for their anniversary 3 years ago. The one she wore when she wanted to feel beautiful and confident. "Hi," she said, looking up when he entered. "Hi," he replied, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since their first date. "You look nice." "Thank you." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her. "We should probably talk." Marcus washed his hands at the kitchen sink, partly because they were dirty from work and partly because he needed a moment to prepare himself for whatever came next. 6 months of reading relationship books, practicing new communication skills, learning to listen instead of fix, and supporting Sarah through her mother's recovery had led to this moment. He sat down across from her, noting that she had set out 2 cups of tea and that her expression was calm but serious. This was Sarah in decision-making mode, the same focused energy she brought to difficult conversations with parents or administrators at school. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. 6 months. 6 months, Marcus agreed. Sarah was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "When I gave you that ultimatum, I was angry and frustrated and honestly pretty hopeless about us. I felt like I had spent years begging you to engage with our marriage and nothing I said ever seemed to matter. I was ready to give up." Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he didn't interrupt. This was Sarah's moment to speak, and he had learned the importance of letting her finish her thoughts. "I think part of me expected you to fail," she continued. "Not because I wanted you to, but because I had gotten so used to disappointment that it felt safer to expect nothing than to hope for change that might not come." "And now?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah took a sip of her tea, her eyes meeting his over the rim of the cup. "Now I'm looking at a man who drove 6 hours to support me through my mother's medical crisis, who learned to ask me about my day because he actually wants to hear the answer, not just because he thinks he should, who reads marriage books and takes notes like he's studying for the most important test of his life." She paused, and Marcus felt something that might have been hope beginning to bloom in his chest. "You're not the same person who sat in Dr. Williams' office 6 months ago, Marcus. That man would have promised to change and then gotten frustrated when change turned out to be harder than he expected. You didn't just promise. You actually did the work." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, an emotional response that would have embarrassed him 6 months ago, but now felt appropriate to the magnitude of the moment. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," he said. "Learning to love you in ways you could actually feel instead of just ways that made sense to me. But it was also the most important thing I've ever done." Sarah nodded, and Marcus could see tears in her eyes too. "I know it was hard. I watched you struggle with it. Watched you catch yourself falling into old patterns and force yourself to try a different approach. I saw you reading books about emotional intelligence at the shop when you thought I wouldn't notice." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing the journey they had taken to reach this point. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he had seen from her since before their problems began. "Now I prove how I feel." She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt both familiar and completely new. "I love you, Marcus. I never stopped loving you. But for a while there, I didn't like you very much, and I definitely didn't trust you with my heart. You were so focused on being right and solving problems that you forgot to be my partner." Marcus squeezed her hand, overwhelmed by the relief of hearing her say the words he had been hoping for but hadn't dared to expect. "But these past 6 months, you've shown me that you can learn and grow and change in ways I didn't think were possible. You've proven that our marriage matters enough to you that you'll do the hard work of becoming a better husband, even when it means admitting you were wrong about things you thought you understood." Sarah stood up, still holding his hand, and Marcus rose with her. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent she had worn on their wedding day. "I want to try again," she said. "Not go back to how we were, but move forward to who we can be together. I want to see what our marriage looks like when we're both fully present and committed to supporting each other." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how different this moment felt from all the times he had thought their problems were solved with a simple gesture or quick conversation. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm still learning. I'm going to make mistakes." "I'm sure," Sarah said, "and I'm going to make mistakes too. The difference is that now I trust you to care about getting it right instead of just being right." When Marcus kissed her, it felt like the first kiss of a new relationship rather than the reconciliation of an old one. All the work they had both put in over the past 6 months had created something stronger and more honest than what they had built in their early years together. Later that evening, as they sat on their couch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their plans for the future, Sarah pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Marcus asked. "Your 6-month anniversary present," Sarah said with a grin. "Open it." Inside the package was a book titled The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, the same book Marcus had found on their shelf that first night after her ultimatum. But this was a new copy, and when he opened it to the first page, he found an inscription in Sarah's careful handwriting. To Marcus, "Thank you for proving that love is a choice we make every day. Here's to making that choice together for the next 50 years. Love, Sarah." Marcus looked up at her, overwhelmed by gratitude for this woman who had loved him enough to demand he become worthy of that love. "50 years?" he asked. "At least," Sarah said, curling up beside him on the couch. "We've got a lot of time to make up for." As they planned their future together, both of them understood that the work wasn't finished. Marriage, they had learned, wasn't a problem to be solved once and then forgotten. It was a daily practice of choosing each other, supporting each other's growth, and creating a partnership that could weather whatever challenges came their way. But for the first time in years, they were both committed to doing that work together, as true partners rather than two people trying to fix each other. Sarah had given Marcus 6 months to prove he could repair their broken marriage. Instead, he had learned to build something entirely new. And in doing so, he had discovered that the most important things in life couldn't be fixed with the right tools and techniques. They could only be nurtured with patience, attention, and the kind of love that chooses to show up every single day. The room that had been silenced by Sarah's ultimatum 6 months ago was now filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the sound of two people planning a future together. Marcus Thompson had finally learned that the most complex repair job of his life wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about building something beautiful from the ground up, one careful day at a time.